Hello and welcome to IH Talks. I'm Christopher Walker from IH Bielsko-Biała in the south of Poland, and today we're talking about word recognition subskills in listening with Daniel Say.
Hello, Chris. I'm Daniel Say from IH Milan and San Donato. I think there are two major reasons why we should be talking about word recognition subskills in listening. First, it goes without saying that without the ability to recognize words in listening, it's impossible for us to achieve a sufficient level of comprehension.
Mhm.
So if we can't work out what the other person is saying, then won't be able to have a communication, the kind of speaking interaction with them. Second, lots of language learners, including the ones I've worked with in Italy, they often find it quite challenging to understand every word. And sometimes, they've heard the sound, but they can't really convert it into English words. It's an issue that comes up time and again in listening lessons and
Mhm.
even in the learner's needs analyses. So I think it's definitely worth talking about this topic.
Mhm. Do you think that this whole area of the word recognition subskills, do you think that it's maybe not unique to English, but it's certainly something that English provides us with concerns for compared to other languages, right? Because when I'm here in Poland, I'm always astonished when somebody asks for like a name and surname, the other person only has to say it once and boom, got it. That's fine. Whereas when I was in England working in a shop and if I had to take people's details, I had to kind of double check that I'd heard right, that I wasn't letting one word run into the other, or there wasn't some sort of bizarre spelling that had to be accommodated. What do you think about that sort of thing?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I think it applies to all languages. Um, I'm just thinking about my experience of teaching in Italy. Now, Italian is a kind of phonological language,
Yeah.
if I'm using the right word, and there's a regular relationship between sound and spelling. When it comes to English, I think most learners struggle with a lot of features of connected speech.
Hmm.
That's because when we're talking more or less fluently, we don't actually pronounce every word in isolation. And I think that's the reason why most learners struggle with identifying those features of connected speech and then trying to convert the sound into words.
That's right. I get this with my daughters, incidentally, because they're bilingual. And sometimes I'll speak to them in English, and one of them will look at me confused and say, "But what does mean?" And then they repeat back a word that I know that they know, but with another sound attached to it. And they hadn't broken up the chunks appropriately. So they thought I was using new lexis when actually it was more a failure of connected speech or understanding what's happening there.
That's right. Remember teaching a group of intermediate teens, and I think one of the students gave me a response, and it was very short. It was an egg, an egg, and it was spoken out of context. And I was just thinking, well, hang on, come again. Can you say it again? And I think it's that kind of thing. It's like, when you take words out of context, then they lose meaning.
Yeah, yeah. In fact, that's actually how a lot of language entered English in the first place, isn't it? I mean, there are lots of examples of words that arrived in English from another language, and then either from a process of assimilation of one of the sounds going from the article into the word, or the other way. This is how you end up with, for example, the Spanish naranja, but then the English orange, because saying an orange was not so easy, so the N migrated.
Exactly. And you'll be surprised that sometimes, even with the simplest words in English, because we pronounce them in a different way to what those learners perceive in their first language, then they'll fail to understand the word at all.
Wow, it's really interesting. How much of a challenge does this present to the average teacher then when they think about developing their students' core listening skills?
I think it's easier with one-to-one students,
Hmm.
because obviously after the comprehension task, you can ask the students, which part of the listening did you not understand, and then you can just go back to the recording and then play it again, or just that part, that snippet. Um, I think in group classes, there's less flexibility when it
Hmm.
comes to identifying the source of problems that learners have with word recognition skills. I think it's still possible
Yeah.
because we can identify the most common types of difficulties, and then we can focus on those problems and then work on
Hmm.
them.
Yeah. But it requires the teacher themselves to have a fairly good understanding of these different subskills and of the aspects of connected speech that we've been discussing. Do you think it's very important for teachers to know the different labels for things within connected speech, things like elision and assimilation and things like that? Or is it more important just to be able to practically show the students what's going on?
I think for the teacher, it's definitely helpful to understand what's going on with connected speech. I think they should know the labels, but it's not necessarily good for the learners to kind of understand. Well, it's elision, it's assimilation. I think teachers can explain these terms in layman's words.
Hmm. So it's a lot more about raising awareness amongst the students so that these are actually factors that they have to consider.
Absolutely.
Wow. Okay, so if I can summarize, we've been talking a little bit about some of the kind of the difficulties that a lot of students have because of the nature of the English language. The way that when you see something written down, that's not how it's going to sound when it's actually produced in speaking when we listen. So it's important for us to consider the ways in which connected speech can impact our understanding of the language we hear.
Definitely. Thank you,
Wow.
Chris.
Thank you, Daniel, say so much for your time today. This brings to an end our IH talk. Thank you again.